Okay, so we're on Hey Bays Amid Aleph, 5 lines from the top. And this is a continuation of the Mishnah. And if you remember, we had a interesting, or like I said, a counterintuitive explanation of the Mishnah that the Rashbam gave. The Mishnah had said, we said if someone's kind of shtei ilanis, if Ruvain bought 2 ilanis in Shimon's property, he doesn't get the cargo with it, but on the other hand, he does get a benefit from the fact that he doesn't get karka, that if his tree grows out, if his tree expands and it's shading over Shimon's property, since Shimon had to allow Ruvain to grow his tree, and he doesn't give him any karka, so he gives him certain rights to take care of his tree. So part of that also includes that if the tree grows bigger, Shimon can't go and cut back the tree in order to protect his property because he sold the right to keep his tree, sold the right to Reuven to keep the tree there. So we said, part of what we said is, if someone grew a tree, he can't let it grow out. And we also said in the Mishnah, that which comes out of the trunk, excuse me, that was true whether it was 2 trees or 3 trees, whether you got karka or not. Whatever grows out of the trunk belongs to the purchaser. He purchased the tree, so he certainly gets what grows out of the trunk. We said in the Mishnah, that which grows out of the trunk certainly belongs to the purchaser of the tree, whether he bought 2 trees or 3, whether he got karka. But we said the shroshim, because that is shroshim, will depend. If Ruvain bought 3 trees, so then he gets the karka, so then he also gets to keep what comes out of the shroshim, what's basically sticking up out of the ground, doesn't make a difference. He gets ground as well, because he bought 3 trees. 3 trees is like a mini orchard. He gets the karka as well. But if he only bought 2 trees, then he doesn't get the karka with it. Therefore, he doesn't get that which the shoots that grow out of the roots of the tree. So the Gemara asks, what is considered from the trunk and what is considered from the roots? Very, very sensible. That which comes out of the trunk, which is coming out of the air, it's coming from above ground level. That's considered to be from the trunk, and it belongs to the owner of the tree, which is always going to be Ruvain, the purchaser. But that which comes out of the ground, what comes out of which the origination of the shoot is not coming from, it's not out in the open air, but it's from underground. That's going to be considered. It's going to depend on whether Ruvain bought 2 trees or 3 trees. If he bought 3 trees, he got karka, then that also belongs to him. But if not, not. Frak the Gemara, but we have a problem. Maybe, what happens if Reuven bought 2 trees and there were shoots that were coming out of the trunk, were all the way at the bottom of the trunk, and therefore they belong to Reuven, and Reuven only has 1 tree there. But then what happens is, so those shoots belong to Reuven, belong to the purchasers, they're coming out of the trunk. What if dirt builds up around the base of these shoots? And now it appears like there are 3 trees there. There were 2 shoots that came out, and because the dirt built up around them, these shoots belong to Reuven because they originated on the trunk, but now the dirt built up, and now it looks like there are 3 trees. Basically, Reuven is going to take advantage of the situation, and he's going to claim, I have 3 trees. Look, I got this tree. This is the main tree that I bought, and these other 2 trees that also, I've got the deed on them. I have, they belong to me. Everyone agrees they belong to me. And nobody remembers that originally they were part of the tree because dirt has piled up around them. He says, look, if it came it obviously is not from Shroshim because then it wouldn't belong to me. So it must be that these are separate trees that I bought. And if I bought 3 trees, I get the ground in between them. So contrary to what you, Shimon, are claiming, I'm allowed to use the entire area in between these trees. Amr of Nachman says yikotz. V'chein Rav Yechanan yikotz. They say, you're right. The truth is that something that comes out of the trunk belongs to the purchaser, but because we're worried about this possibility that he'll claim it's a separate tree that he bought, he's allowed to have those trees. He can use them as wood. He can cut them off and take those shoots or replant them somewhere else. But he's not allowed to keep them there because of this problem, this potential problem. Amar of Nachman, another din. Matinen dekel ein legaza. So now we'll be talking about trees in general. Rav Nachman's saying specifically a dekel, which is a palm tree. All of us who have been to Florida or Eretz Yisrael, we know what a dekel looks like. It's a long, thin trunk. Ein legaza, it has no trunk. That sounds absurd. What does that mean? It doesn't have a trunk. Of course it has a trunk. Sabra of Zvid Lememer, ein legaza lebal dekel. What it means to say is, we just said a din, that which grows out of the trunk belongs, and this is not going on the previous halacha. We're done with that issue of being mechuyev to be yaketz, to cut it down. Now we're talking about the general din, that which grows out of a trunk belongs to the person who owns the tree. He's saying that's only true. Rav Zvid is saying that this din that Rav Nachman said that a dekel doesn't have a trunk, it means to say that the trunk of a palm tree, shoots that come out of that trunk are not going to belong to the purchaser. Given the lemechbo l'sharishkai, since as we said in the earlier Gemara, we mentioned the fact that palm trees are different than other trees in that when the top of it dies, it doesn't regenerate. You can't cut it down and regenerate. So the person who buys a palm tree, he says, listen, I'm getting whatever coconuts or dates or whatever comes out of the top of this tree for the next couple of years, but inevitably it's going to die, and then when it dies, I'm done with this tree. So he's not thinking about what can grow out of the bottom of the tree because he doesn't look at it as a long-term purchase. So asuchim masach daite. Therefore he's mesiach das, and therefore he's not intending to purchase what grows out of the trunk of the tree because of its status that it's something that doesn't regenerate, so he's not thinking in those terms. That's the way the Rashbam explains it. Maskal or Rapapa, well, koine shtei ilanis. Rapapa asks on this pshat. Our Mishnah had said someone who buys 2 ilanis, the din is that we still said even though he only got 2 ilanis, he gets to keep what comes out of the trunk. And the Mishnah did not differentiate between palm trees and other trees. Said any trees that a person buys, if he buys 2 trees, he gets to take what comes out of the trunk. So how could Rav Zvid say it's not true for palm trees? Because the person, he despairs of ever getting anything out of the trunk. Some of them, when we talk about decals, they're not going to regenerate. And even so, the Mishnah said he does get to keep what comes out of the trunk. Elam Rapapa says Rav Nachum was saying a different thing. Ein legezel about dekel, lefisha ein moitzi gezel. He says that what Rav Zvid is trying to say is that a person who buys a dekel, he doesn't get the dekel because it doesn't produce. It's not the same thing that we said before that it's going to die automatically. He's saying because it doesn't normally produce geza. It's true that someone who bought a palm tree and he said, I want to get whatever shoots come out of it, he would get it. But over here, he just doesn't have that in mind because it's not a normal thing to happen. As we know, right? You look at a decal, doesn't have branches, goes straight up. So he's not thinking in terms that something's going to come out of it. So our Mishnah is not talking about it. It's talking about Ilanis that did Yesh LaGaza. Talking about something that has Gaza, but this is not included in the Mishnah because it's not normally something that produces shoots from the trunk. So that's why Rav Papa says, so it's really, in a lot of ways, it's similar to Zvid Svara, because it's dependent on the fact that the person doesn't think that the person who's purchasing doesn't expect to ultimately get shoots out of it. But because Rav Zvid says the reason is specifically because shoots don't come out of it, so then we could understand that the Mishnah wasn't referring to that case. Because it says someone who buys a tree, he gets what comes out. But over here, people don't normally expect it to go out, so the Mishnah wasn't talking about that case. In fact, the Gemara, I'm sorry, that was Rav Papa's pshat. What about Rav Zvid, who said originally the pshat that he's Mesiach Das because he thinks the tree is not going to regenerate and he doesn't consider what's going to go out of it? Kasher Masnishin. What about our Mishnah? Our Mishnah said in either case, we're talking about someone who bought the tree for 5 years. When he buys it for tree, the whole reason why he said he's Mesiach Das, he doesn't intend to get the shoots that grow out of the trunk, is because he doesn't expect the tree to be around for that long. But in this case, he purchased the right to have a tree for 5 years. So even if the tree dies, he could replant it. So in that case, he's not Mesiach Das from anything. It's not a short-term purchase. It's not a 6-month purchase where he expects it to die after a year and then be done with it. He's getting it for 5 years, so he expects it to be a fuller purchase that includes also the shoots that come out of it. Right? According to Rizvid, it is a normal thing. People don't think that trunks of palm trees don't produce shoots. That's not his issue, just that it doesn't live. But in this case, yeah, he purchased it for 5 years, so it is going to be around for a while. So we said the second part of a Mishnah. The first part of a Mishnah was if someone bought 2 trees, he doesn't get karka with it. But if he bought, the Mishnah continues, if he bought 3 trees, then he gets the karka along with it. But kama, what does he get along? What karka does he get along with the 3 trees? He gets obviously directly underneath the trunks, ubeinein, and the area in between the trees. You know, you can basically make a triangle wherever the trees are, and that anything within that triangle, you're talking about 3 trees, that's going to be included. He gets in addition a little bonus area for his oira, for the person who's going to harvest the fruit, Vasali in his basket. He needs a little bit of space to stand underneath the tree, and as we're going to see, he's going to shake the tree and cause the fruits, the figs, to come out. So he needs a little space for that. So he gets that bonus space around the tree. Maskefla Rav Elazar. Rav Elazar asked the following question: Hashda derech ein loy oir v'sali yesh loy. This is Gemara is hearkening back to the classic machlokes that we had between the Tanakama and Rebbe Akiva, where whether someone who sells, we spoke specifically out of bar v'dus, if someone sold a cistern for water in the middle of his property, does he sell a derech? Does he sell a path to get to that cistern that he sold in the middle of his property? So Rebbe Akiva holds that hamoicher is ba'ayin yafa moicher. He sells to the person along with what that person needs in order to be able to take advantage of his purchase. So that would include, obviously, the path to get to it. But the Tanakama says, no, HaMoicher is ba'ayin ro'yoif moicher. He only sells the minimum necessary. So Beleza asks, our Mishnah, as he's going to prove, is clearly going like the Rabbanan. Because we're saying, we'll prove it he's going to prove it from the Gemara, in the Gemara. And if that's the case, a person doesn't get a derech along with his trees that he purchased. If he sold trees in the middle of his property, the purchaser is going to have to buy a derech. So, hashta derech einle oir v'sali yeshle. If he doesn't have a derech, certainly he shouldn't get an extra bonus area to be able to pick for his trees. Derech einle da'arach rituhu. Oir v'sali yeshle. He doesn't get a derech because the seller's property is a different property. It's not part of what the purchaser purchased. So this certainly shouldn't get, it's not really a certainly, but it's more, they're really the same thing. Just like the seller's property is not part of what was purchased. It's entirely separate property, and the purchaser has no rights in it, according to the Rabbanan, so too, the purchaser doesn't have any rights to have a little strip of land around the property, around the trees that he brought to pick it. Amr of Zera, Midiv Rabbeinu Nilmud Shloisha. Nilmud. We learn from Rav Zera's kasha that he's saying we're going like the Rabbanon, the Chachamim who disagree with Rabbi Kiva, and they say Hamaycher is ba'ayin ra Hamaycher Shloisha hu de'en leider. It's only by 3 that he doesn't. That according to the Chachamim, he doesn't get a derech. Hashnayim yeshlei. He said derech ein lei. It's only because it's shloisha, because the person got karka along with it, he doesn't get it. But shnayim yeshlei. But if it would be shnayim, he would get the derech. And this is very similar to the svara we said about meshapa, about whether the seller can cut the trees that have grown out and are shading over his property. The idea is, if the purchaser is getting karka along with his trees, so then that's the limits of his purchase. He gets the trees, he gets his karka, and then he's done. But someone who buys 2 trees, so he obviously has to have some ability to use these trees. So the seller has to give him an easement to be able to get there and maintain his trees. And forgetting about arriving at the trees, he has to have the ability to use the trees. So even if he could fly there with a hoverboard, he's still not going to be able to use the trees if he can't go underneath the trees and shake it and get out. So he has an easement to use the property. So once he has an easement to use the property, he also gets an easement to walk to the property. So the din of the Chachamim that they disagreed with Rabbi Kiva and they say that ba'ayin ra meicha, that's only in the case of 3 trees where the seller got his karka, and that's it. He's done. But where the purchaser got his karka together with his trees, and then that's the end of his rights. But in the case where he didn't get any karka, so he gets some rights to use his trees, those rights can be expanded to also include the derech. The Amalei Ba'aradi Dachkami, because he could say, listen, my tree is in your property, you have to allow me to use my tree, so that also includes getting to it. So that's a separate point that Rav Zera makes that we can deduce from Rav Zera's kasha. Amalei Rav Nachman by Yitzchak l'Rava Leimer Belazer Lesley the Shmuel Rabbi. Are you saying that Rabbi Elazar, who said he's saying that this l'chayru this mission is going like the Rabbanan and not like Rabbi Kiva? Does Rabbi Elazar doesn't hold of Shmuel his Rabbi? Damar Shmuel halacha Rabbi Kiva. He says that halacha is like Rabbi Kiva, and you're saying, Rabbi Elazar, you seem to be saying that this Mishnah must go like the Chachamim. But Rav Shmuel, your Rabbi, passing like Rabbi Kiva. Damar meicha ba'ayin yafa meicha. Amalei lo misukah masisin Rabbi Kiva. He says, no, it's not that I disagree with Shmuel. Certainly Shmuel is right that we pass like Rabbi Kiva. But our particular Mishnah, it has an internal proof that this Mishnah is going not like Rabbi Kiva. Even though the Psak is like Rabbi Kiva, but this Mishnah is going like the Chacham. Mimai, where do we see that from? And this is what we said before, that we'll have a proof that we're going like the Chacham. Megditani higdilu yishap. Like we said before, this is what I sort of gave it away in the beginning. We said if the purchaser's property, his tree grows out and now it's shading over the property of the seller, and we're talking about a case where there were 3 trees, and we're saying, so therefore the purchaser got karka together with his trees. If it grows further, then the seller could say, you got your trees, you have your karka, you can't go into my property. The Gemara is assuming, or at least Rabbi Elazar is assuming, you can't say that a meicher is ba'ayin yafa meicher, but even so, when he sells the trees, he's saying that, if your trees grow 1 inch more, I'm not selling you any karka underneath it. I'm going to retain the right to cut down your trees. That wouldn't be congruent with the idea of hamoicha ba'ayin yafa meicha. That's very mean-spirited. Sakdamara, what are you talking about? That's not a good comparison. Amalei Emed Amar Rabbi Kiva Gabi bar v'dustel michashiyara gabi. That was Rabbi Kiva says that we don't. He says hamoicher is ba'ayin yafa moicher. He says if you give the person a path to get to his bar, it's not hurting your property. Gabi ilam mishamle, but over here we're talking about a tree. The tree is growing out. He has a massive oak tree that's spreading out. It's 100 feet wide, and he's losing a significant part of his field because of the shade. He can't grow anything underneath it. That's damaging him. Mila Maida Rabbi Kiva. Don't we see that Rabbi Kiva is not radical on this topic of a moicher's ba'ayin yafa moicher? He realizes there are limitations that a person doesn't want to have something ruining his field. Mila Maida Rabbi Kiva that if someone has a tree that is hanging over his friend's field, that you can cut the person whose field is being overhung by the other tree. He's allowed to cut it down the amount that he needs in order to be able to conduct his oxen underneath it. He has a stick that he uses. So he's allowed to make room for his oxen to go underneath the tree. So you see that even, and there's no mention over there that Rabbi Kiva is chaylik on that. So Rabbi Kiva is masking that a person wants to keep on his own property the ability to use it fully. So the same thing over here. If the person's, if Ruvain's tree that he bought is now overhanging Shimon's property that was always his, he can say, I don't want you to overhang me, and it's nothing to do with moicha ba'ayin yafa moicha. This is taking away from my livelihood. So we're left without a raya that the Mishnah is only going like the Chachamim and not like Rabbi Kiva, because we're saying even Rabbi Kiva could be masking it. So therefore, Rabbi Lazar's kasha is not a good kasha. But he said hasha derech ein loy or v'saloi yesh loy, but it's not the derech ein loy because according to Rabbi Kiva there is a derech. So it could be that we're going to according to Rabbi Kiva, we would say you do get kamali or v'saloi. So the kasha is not a kasha. We have a brayso, even though we don't have a. So the kasha on Reb Chia Barava that said that you get not only the area underneath the trunks and the area in between the trees, but you also get a little bonus area around the trees. That we have a brayso that says the same thing. You get tachtein ubeneim v'chutzlan kamalei oyer v'sal. Amalei abayal Rabbi Yosef. Oysen oyer v'sali mi zoyre. That little section that was saying that now the purchaser has rights around his 3 trees to pick the fruit from the trees, to work with his trees. Who can plant in that area? Amalei Tnisua. Hachitzin Zeres Hadar. This is a Mishnah that we're going to have later on, which talks about where 2 people have gardens. The way I'm picturing it is like it's gardens inside, let's say, an alleyway. So there's walls all around it on 3 sides, and Reuven has the inside one that can only get out by going through Shimon's property. So we say in that case, the one on the inside is allowed to go through the one on the outside. Yeah, because he has a right to go through the other one. He has an easement, but the one on the outside can plant on that section, and the one on the inside, even though he has a right to walk there, doesn't have a right to stop the other one from planting there. Even though I guess it's going to make it a little less pleasant for him to walk because there's going to be corn growing on it, he still can't stop it. Amalei. So we want to say the same thing over here. The seller is the one whose property this Oira Vasali is really on. So even though the purchaser of the tree has a right to go there to pick from his trees, he can't stop the seller from planting on it. So Amalei Midami, Hasam Lesle Psedelekech. In the case of the gardens, the person who purchased the inner property and he has a right to go through the outer property. There's no loss to him if the other person grows things on it, because he's just going to walk over it. It's going to be a little inconvenient, but it's not a loss. The person who has his apple tree that's hanging over and he gets the picker to come with his basket and shake the apple tree and bring down the apples, if it's going to land, if the person, let's say, plants avocados, the apples will land on the avocados. You're going to have a big mess. The avocados are going to get smushed and they're going to ruin the apples when they land on the ground. So even though the picker is going to pick them up, they're all going to be dirty. So it's a loss. It's a problem for someone who has a tree to have stuff planted, to have other things planted underneath it. Masha Enkein, on a path, the fact that the other person is going to have to walk over a planted path is not considered a pseudo. This case is more similar to the seifa of that. So we can really bring a raya to what the din is from the seifa of that mission that we just brought, which is later. Which the Rashbam explains, is talking about a case where they both went to Bezdin and they came and they said, we agree that that Reuven, who has the inner property, is going to only get a path on the edge of Shimon's property. He can't walk straight through Shimon, but he could go on the path of it. So in that case, we said that since they agreed to this path, not in the actual field of Shimon, but on its edge. So in that case, neither of them can put anything in the path. Neither of them can plant. I mean, since he agreed to put it next, not in middle, not going straight through, but on the edge, he doesn't want it to be used for planting. So certainly the guy on the inside, the Reuven, can't plant anything there because he only has a right to walk there. But the guy on the outside, by giving him a right to walk on the edge, is saying, I'm not going to plant anything there, make it slightly more inconvenient for him. Tanya Kavasid Abaya, Reza Kana Tachtein Benem, Bchutzlan Kamaloi Oira Vesali, Bezev Zeh in a Rishan Lizera. We have a raya, Bryce that Taka confirms this final psak, that our case of the tree is going to be similar to that din that we paskened over there, that since they both agree that this section is not going to be used by either of them, the same thing will be for this Mali Oira Vesali, since it's going to cause damage to the person, to the buyer, the owner of the trees, and it's also not if the person who owns it, if the seller plants there, and certainly the owner of the trees doesn't have a right, he doesn't own it there that he could plant either. So this whole time we're talking about three trees as an abstract concept, but it's not a free-for-all. You can't just get three trees, one in Washington State, and one in Texas, and one in New York, and say, I own the triangle in between those three trees. I bought everything in between. There's limits of how far apart the trees can be. And additionally, there's also limits of how close they can be. If they're too close to each other, then it's not an orchard, because you're not going to keep it like that. If you ever I've looked into buying a row of trees for a mechitza, there's a limit how close trees can be to each other, or else they infringe on one another. So if they're too close, that they infringe on one another, they're not going to stay like that, so it's not considered either to be a long-term orchard. So what is the limit? He says it has to be between 4 and 8 amas in order for it to be considered. If they're that distance apart, then it's considered part of an orchard. He says no, it has to be between 8 and 16. I guess it will depend on which tree, because it certainly depends. Different trees have different amounts that they need in between them, but these are the inner and outside limits. You shouldn't disagree with Nachman that he said between 8 and 16 feet. Amos, Detnan. Mastis and Kavos, because you have a mission like him. Detnan, Hanoitas, Karme, Sheshes, Reyamal, Sheshes, Reyamal. If someone makes a vineyard, which is 16 amas of one row of vines from the next row of vines, he can bring wheat in between those. So Rav Nachman had said that up to 16 amas is considered to be, he said up to 16 amas is considered to be, did we say 16? Yeah, up to 16 amas is considered to be two, once it's more than 16 amas, it's considered to be two separate things, but less than that is not. So he's saying that if you have something that's 15 amas away, then it would be considered part of the same zera, but once it's 16, it's not. So this Mishnah is saying that these two vines are not considered to be part of a vineyard, that whatever is in between it is going to be Kalayim, because it's a 16 amas, so that's like Rav Nachman. We have such a Maisa that someone made a 16 amas between the rows of vines. And what he would do is he would separate the leaves, the branches of the vines of two rows, they would both be facing opposite ways, and then he'd plant v'zoros hanir, the area in between the open sides, the sides that was facing away, by leaning it over. So he made it more than 16 amas by making the branches face away from each other. He made more than 16 amas in between, and then he was able to plant up to, if it's not considered a vineyard, then you have to keep it, I think, 6 tfachim away. So you just start 6 tfachim from the end, and then you have like a full, basically 14 amas in between that he could plant wheat. But the next year he would switch it around and make that he would rotate his crops and make that row, he would point the leaves of the vines toward each other and make them close. So therefore he couldn't plant in between because it would be kalayim. Then he would plant on the other sides where now it was open. And they said there's no problem because it's as long as it's 16 amas away, that's good. So you see, like Rav Nachman, that 16 amas is the amount that makes it to be considered an orchard, a unified orchard. I don't know about this story that you're telling me. I had a different story. Bedura Derusa, by a place where shepherds, a city of shepherds, he said someone had trees that were sold, and they were not 16 amas, they were even less than 8 amas. And they came to ask, what Rabbi Yehuda, how far apart do the trees have to be in order for it to be considered that the 3 trees constitute, like we said, a mini orchard, that he gets the karka from it? And he said it has to be kamale, baka v'kelev, enough for a set of oxen and its kalim to walk through. I don't know how much that meant. A person can't plant a tree unless it's 4 amas from his friend's field. And the reason is because you need 4 amas, because that's the amount of space that oxen with their kalim walk through in order to deal with the kerem. So I see that it's dalet amas. So from the fact that you see that he said as long as it's dalet amas, that's enough to make it that it's considered as a group of trees. That's not like Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman had said it had to be a minimum of 8 amas, and we're saying it only has to be 4 amas. So Vaistai is nicht like Rav Nachman, but rather like his chaylik. So we'll stop over here. I think we're going to continue with this machlokes between Rav Nachman and I think Shmuel. Okay. Good day.
You have a great day.
Have
and we'll see you tomorrow somewhere.
Yeah, you let us know. Shkach, thank you.
I'll let you know.